Back to Mom's house. This time, I was upstairs. Basically, we have a living room with a hallway that leads to the bedrooms. It has 3 chairs and one little table for cups. I was in the chair facing the hallway. It was about 3 am. I was gaming with my headphones on as not to bother my mama. I look up and saw this glowing gold outline that was shaped exactly like my mom. I took off my headphones and said, "Mom?" But it kept walking from the hallway, past the chairs, and through the table next to me. I don't even know why I called out to it. Obviously, people don't have a glowing gold outline, but that was just strange. Once I was at my dad's house with his new family. I lived in the room next to the parents, then my brother and my sister. The bathroom is across from my room. I had gotten back from school one day and was calling out for my stepmom. Usually she was upstairs in her room. I looked inside her room and saw a shadow of a woman with her hair in a bun, just like my stepmom's. And I walked in and started talking to my stepmom only. She wasn't in her room at all. Upstairs, toys would also go off constantly with no one there. My stepmom was pregnant, so my sister and I had to move down into the basement. We lived in a 3-story. In the basement, I got the bedroom and my stepsister got the bigger open room. There was a bathroom down there, but the hallway had mirrors on both sides of the wall completely. I'd often find big handprints on the mirrors, and I'd hear footsteps walk from my door to the hallway to the bathroom and back all night. It sounded like shuffling. One night the thing sat on the counter of my bed. I felt the pressure of it sink in the corner of my fucking bed. I can't tell you how scared I was. My sister experienced the footsteps too. Sometimes we would sleep in the same bed. She said she would see a man standing in a room. I also once saw a big handprint on my bed and a baby handprint, which I think was my baby brother. This one was the scariest to me, of my minor stories. My sister and I were on the middle floor. It was about 11 or 12 at night. We were watching a horror flick, and we look over to the left and see a dark figure of a boy standing next to the stairs. My sister pauses the movie and says, "Matt, go upstairs," in a stern voice. It doesn't move, which confirmed to me I wasn't the only one who saw it. She then says again, "Matt!" Nothing. She goes to turn on the light, and it's gone. We were spooked the fuck out. Decided to turn on a different movie. I think a kid's show, lol. My mother went to Eastern Washington University and stayed in one of the houses the locals rented out to college students. I cannot give the exact age of the house, but it was old enough to have a built-in button on the floor that would call up to the servants in the attic, so the house was relatively old. During her studies there, she had 3 different roommates. My uncle was the first, who was then replaced by my mother's best friend, who was then replaced by my father. All 3 of them can confirm strange happenings in this house and be woken up in the middle of the night with people whispering. The worst of it was in my mother's room in the attic. My mother hated that house, but she didn't have anywhere else to live, and the dorms were expensive, so she sucked it up and lived there until she graduated. She hated sleeping alone. The air in her room constantly felt thick and heavy. Her closet was constantly freezing cold, and at night, she would hear multiple people whispering incoherent words at once. While living there, my mother had a cat named Puss who would constantly hide under the bed. One time my mother caught Puss out from under her bed, sitting, watching, and growling at one of the corners of the room. My mother went over to Puss confused at what she was looking at, until she saw a black figure in the corner slowly start to move upwards toward the ceiling. Puss started to become more aggressive, her hissing and growling getting louder, before she freaked out and shot off back under the bed, still growling at the corner until the black figure was gone. My mother had never seen Puss act like this, since Puss was usually a very lovey and happy cat, but whatever that was clearly terrified her. Sometime later, my mother was talking with a friend who was excited to be touring 2 famous paranormal investigators around the college and town. showing them and supposed haunted places. My mother brought up the fact that she has always had weird stuff happening in her house and thinks it may be haunted. Her friend got excited and begged her to let her to the house. My mother refused since she wasn't willing to stay up late for some people that didn't even know. My mother didn't know at the time who these investigators were, since she never really kept up with paranormal stuff, believing it can let evil into your life. She only knew that they were on quite a few popular talk shows at the time. These two investigators were Ed and Lorraine Warrens. Around midnight, my mother's best friend comes to her and tells her that there are people at the door wanting to speak to her. Confused, my mother got in her robe and went to the front door. There, she saw her tour guide friend with 12 other students behind Ed and Lorraine Warren. Lorraine asked my mother if they could come in, as their guide told them that it's possible her house was haunted. My mother agreed and let them all in. Lorraine asked my mother where in the house is the haunting most, and my mother told her that it was her bedroom, that she would take Ed and Lorraine there, but everyone else had to wait. They agreed, and my mother took Ed and Lorraine to her room. When my mother entered her room, she sat on her bed and asked if they could feel it, how heavy the air was. They both agreed that the air was heavy, like how some of the haunted places they've been to. Lorraine walked around the room, then to the closet, and asked if she could hear voices here. My mother broke down crying and said she could hear them every night, and that it kept her up at night. Lorraine told that it was possible that her closet is a doorway for those who passed on, or a doorway to hell. My mother continued to cry before Lorraine came over to her and told her that the reason this stuff is happening to her is because of her mom's family, that the women have some connection with those beyond, and that it's possible that they're psychics, which makes the dead attracted to her. My mother then told Lorraine about the black figure, which Lorraine told her wasn't from this house, but was connected to her family, mainly her dad's side, and that it most likely went after her grandfather, her father, and now her. The figure isn't a ghost or a demon, but something pure evil, and that it wants her. Fearful, my mother asked them if they could bless her room, which they did, and after further investigation of the house, Ed and Lorraine told her that her house was the first place that actually showed activity and signs of haunting in the whole area. After they finished blessing the house, Ed and Lorraine left. Time passed, and my mom's best friend moved out and my dad moved in. The activity in the house still continued, even after the blessing. At first, my father was skeptical of the house being haunted, until one night, while sleeping in my mom's bed, he heard the whispering. He asked my mother what she said, and she told him she didn't say anything. After a few moments of silence between them, she asked if he could hear them. Confused, my father asked what she was talking about, and she told him the whispering. He then agreed that she heard the whispering and asked where it was coming from, which he then told her it was from the closet and it happens every night. Sometime after, my father got curious about whether or not the servants button still worked. Originally, no one had ever been up into the attic. Both of my parents made their way up to the attic, but never reached the top, since on their way there, both of my parents felt like they couldn't breathe, as the temperatures dropped to the freezings, and my mother started to panic as she felt like she was being choked. She quickly told my father to turn back around, because it felt as though they were not wanted up there. Not wanting to upset my mother more, my father turned back and never went up there again. Once my mother graduated college, they moved out of the house and strange events continued to occur, no matter where they moved. Around the time I was born, my parents lived in a rather small house with my two older brothers. Constantly, our cats would freak out, growling and hissing at the corners of the house. Not only that, but my mother would constantly see this black figure around the house. Later, my family had our new house constructed and we moved out of our old one. These strange events followed us and got worse. One day, when I was around 5, I was walking outside my room to walk downstairs. The moment I walked to the balcony, I felt someone grab my arm extremely roughly. I turned around and I just see a black figure holding my arm. I screamed for my mother. She came running upstairs and she sees the black figure. She grabs my arm and tries to pull me away, but the figure wouldn't let go. She pulled as hard as she could and ripped me away from the figure. As she does, the figure disappears and a giant hand mark is left on my arm. My mother runs downstairs and screams at my father to get my brothers, and that they're leaving the house until it's blessed. We later had a priest come to our house and bless it. Afterward, the activity stopped, but growing up, me and my second older brother would constantly have nightmares of this figure in our dreams, doing awful things to us, but it had bright red eyes and would chase us. Nothing else has happened since then, and I still live in the house. Every once in a while, I get this sudden fear from the staircase. I never go downstairs at night without the lights on, out of fear of this thing that's possibly still there. I'd spoken to my mother about the dreams and stuff that happened to her, but she tries to avoid talking about it, since she believes the more we talk about it, the more it will come back. She's told me that though she spoke with my grandfather about this figure, who refused to talk about it since the first time she brought it up, he went pale as a ghost. He said that the figure used to torment him as a child, and his dad would tell him about the figure and how it would come for him, as it did with him. My mother didn't realise that it was Ed and Lorraine Warren until we were watching a documentary about them, and she points out that they were the ones who came to our house. I was speechless, and she was confused as I told her that they were the Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most famous paranormal investigators, that they were the ones who started publicly doing investigations, and there were famous horror movies that involved them. My mother freaks out and tells my father about it, and while my father was shocked, he didn't think much of it. I apologise if my story is a little all over the place, but this was my best attempt to explain my mother's story and my experience, since my mother doesn't like to talk about it, much out of fear. I live in a small condo or apartment. It's about 500 square foot, and it has no shady history. It was built in the 80s. We knew who the last owners were, and they owned it for a decade and are definitely still alive. We've been here for almost 4 years. It's just me and my husband. Husband and I were getting ready for bed. I was out for a smoke, so he did his teeth and all that before me, and got into bed maybe 5 minutes or less before I got inside from the porch. You can see the door to the bathroom from the kitchen, but it's partially blocked off by a half wall, separating the kitchen from the entrance hall, and then the bathroom at the other side. So I walked to the sink to grab some water. I saw a figurehead into the washroom, and then heard what sounded close to dry heaving, like that gurgle backwash sound that someone makes when they might puke but haven't quite done it yet. The door to the bathroom was still open, but I couldn't see the toilet from where I'm standing. Knowing my husband is fairly private for that stuff, I stood there for a moment and listened. I heard more gurgling and dry heaving. He didn't come out, so I slowly crept up to the door to ask if he was okay, while still trying to maintain his privacy by not seeing the toilet. He replied from the bathroom, down the hall. He asked me to repeat what I said because he hadn't quite heard me. Confused, I went fully into the bathroom, and there was no one there. I would just chalk up to the toilet or shower making noises, but I definitely thought I saw someone walk in there, and then the noises happened for a good half a minute after. So I'm feeling like I'm losing my mind. This happened about 3 years back now. My friend and I were 15 and 14 at the time, me being the older one. In 2019, my friend, who I will call Nim, was house-sitting a friend's dogs. The family lived in the country, and most cars we saw drive by there were less than 5. Nim was staying the week watching 4 labs. He knew the house was haunted because they'd hear the occasional footsteps on the stairs, or the dogs would start barking at the staircase and be too scared to go up them. They spent the first night along, the next 3 nights with our other friend. The friend got too freaked out because they started seeing people staring at them through the windows, while outside, or they'd hear laughter and talking upstairs. The friend left, and Nim invited me to stay the last 3 days with them. Nim told me the house was haunted and everything that had happened. I'd never had any bad experience with the paranormal before, so I wasn't really worried. We were sleeping in the living room, and the first night, nothing really went on. The second night, we heard footsteps go up the stairs, and sometimes we heard someone talking, but neither of us really minded. We both have always been believers, and neither of us wanted to upset any spirits that were possibly there, so we didn't talk about it. The third night was when shit hit the fan. Nim's dad had ordered us pizza, and we sat on the road while eating it. Nim had sent me inside to get something, maybe cups. I went straight to the kitchen and went back out. To get to the kitchen, we had to pass by the living room, but we wouldn't have been anywhere near the windows. When I went back out, Nim asked if I sat on the couch and looked at them through the window. I simply told them no, and we shrugged it off and continued eating. Nim had gone inside because neither of us remembered to grab napkins. I'm generally the protective friend, so I watched Nim go in case they got too freaked out or in case they tripped. I looked at the same window they saw me in, and I saw them looking at me as well. When Nim came out, I asked if they did what I did, and they said no. I went to the bathroom first, then grabbed the napkins, and then came straight out. The bathroom was in the kitchen. Fast forward, we go inside, and Nim was fast asleep on the couch. It was an L shape, so it was fairly big. I had 3 of the labs with me, one by my head, another by my feet, and another on the floor next to me. It was past midnight, and I was scrolling through my phone. I heard the youngest lab next to me growling at the arched doorway, and when I looked, he was stood up and staring at the doorway. The one at my feet was stood up on the couch, but not growling, while the one by my head was still laying down. He was looking at the doorway like the other 2. I didn't care too much as I had heard footsteps running up the stairs and giggling all night, so I thought they were growling at the stairs. I only actually looked at the doorway when the oldest by my head had climbed over my legs and was growling. I turned off my phone and sat up. When I looked where they were, I saw a black figure standing there. There was enough shining in the dining room to outline the figure. Of course, I panicked a bit, because it just supposed to be Nim and I. I didn't move from the spot even when the thing looked at me. I don't know how long I held eye contact with it. All I knew was I was too scared to move from my spot. I felt like I was paralyzed. The 3 dogs by me had all stood up and were staring at the figure. 2 were growling and 1 was whimpering. I didn't realize it was walking towards me until it got to the door frame. That's when I finally moved and jumped over to Nim and woke them up. The 4th dog woke up since they were cuddling with Nim, and the other 3 still looked angry or upset at the doorway. I tried telling Nim what happened and even played out to them what I saw. I don't know if they believed me, but I'm sure me having a panic attack and almost crying from fear was convincing enough. Nim stayed up with me and I didn't sleep until I got back home. I don't think I've ever been so happy to leave a place. Towards the end of April, my boyfriend and I moved into a historic mansion. Of course, it's haunted. We expected it to be. I've been in tune with energies since I was younger, and have experienced paranormal encounters most of my life, but this is something I've never come across. A little backstory about the place. It was built in 1850, it's converted into an apartment complex. We live on the 3rd floor, and it's attic. The walls are small, and it's got a very vintage feeling. My neighbours told me that the mansion was built in 1850, and that was about it. As soon as we walked into the building, I knew something was there, but I didn't feel evil or bad. I was picking up a young female in her 20s. I could see she had brown hair, brown eyes, and wearing a lace purple dress. I also saw an old woman at the staircase, wearing a black veil and a black dress. Her face seemed to be hardened, like she was angry. I want to say she died of a stroke. In my dreams, I saw a young man, maybe in his 30s, with a black beard, green eyes, and a toddler wearing a white shirt, overalls, and black pants. I assume this home belonged to a family a while back. I never thought anything of it. My friends that came over would claim to have been watched, and they really don't like the staircase where the old lady stands. Since we've moved in here, we've heard knocking above us. We have an attic in our attic. I don't know, that's weird. And things have been moved or turned on. One night, when we had some friends over, we played Mario Kart, and the TV turned off completely. I told Sam, the young lady in a purple dress, to turn the TV back on, and sure enough, she did. Also, I'm not too sure if this is her real name, but it's the first thing that popped into my mind when I saw her. I would also like to point out, the minute we moved in, I burnt Palo Santo out in the living rooms, and all the rooms. And if you're familiar with black salt, I made sure to put some on every window in the house, including my son's. So everything is going fine and normal in our new place, until last night. Me and my family and my good friend were staying the night with us for a bit, because we're in the middle of a heat wave, and she has no AC in her apartment. We had a thunder and lightning storm. After I woke up with it, my baby was wide awake in pain, because he's 8 months old and has his 2 button teeth coming in. So I thought he was in pain. We are all sleeping out in the living room, on the floor near the AC. My boyfriend and I decided to put our son in his crib, since his fussiness wasn't going down. For some reason, I had a strange feeling that I needed to check the baby monitor, so I did. I have our monitor connected to my phone, and I go and open the app. As I hear my baby playing in his crib, laughing and talking, I see that there's something moving on the left side of the screen. I go to examine the figure on my phone for a minute, until I realised that what I saw moving wasn't a bug. It was too big to be a bug. Then my second thought was maybe it's a dust particle. I then realised that dust particles don't move that fast. Unless, of course. Unsure of what to make of this, I showed my boyfriend who was laying next to me. We both examined the monitor, and we both concluded that what we were seeing were orbs. We both entered in the room, and as soon as we do, this salt lamp flickered. Then it started to get cold. We both felt the salt lamp, and it was freezing. And remember, we're in the middle of a heat wave. All of a sudden, I get this cold, sad feeling coming from the corner of the room. I grab my baby out of his crib, and we move him back into the living room. As soon as I do this, we still have the monitor recording. The orbs are still there. The next morning, I posted the videos on Facebook. One of my friends took the video into Photoshop and saw a man's face at the end of the crib. Later, he finds 2 women and a toddler. He sent me these pictures via Messenger, and he commented on the post with them. But the quality of the pictures aren't too great.
Strange things are happening again. For starters, my son's stomach problems have come back, and it seems to be worse now than the first time he had unexplained stomach problems. But anyways, we've been hearing strange things in the house. I'll be laying in bed at night and hear a man laughing. I will wake my son and husband up, and the laughter stops. Then me and my husband, neither of us smoke, and in certain parts of our house you can smell cigarette smoke really bad, as if someone is smoking right at that moment. And we have started to hear noises coming from our basement, and I'm sure I'm not going down there to see what the heck it is. Then last night we were getting ready for bed, and I was standing in my son's room. If you've read the first post, you know we have a door that is connected to our son's room, so that we can keep an eye on him because of the strange things that have happened. And my husband was standing in our room, and I asked him if he just saw our bed move, like someone had sat down on it and moved a little bit. He said yes, and started to look under the cover to make sure neither of our dogs had snuck under the cover while we weren't looking. But there were no dogs in the bed. I woke up twice last night to a man's laughing. It's 5:10 in the morning as I'm writing this. My husband has left for work and I'm wide awake because I'm scared to go back to bed. If anyone knows of any ways to help, please let me know. I was asking some of my family members what they had experienced in our house. My stepdaughter's experience. My stepdaughter lived with us from the ages 17 to 18, and she stayed in the room that our son stays in now. She told me one night she went to use the bathroom and shower, and she had a conversation with a woman that she thought was me. The door was shut, so she thought I was sitting on her bed talking to her, because whatever it was mimicked my voice, and she had a 20-minute conversation with whatever it was. Now, I remember this happening because me and my husband, her father, were in the living room with our son watching TV. I remember her coming in the living room and telling me it was rude to just walk off in the middle of our conversation. And me and my husband told her I hadn't got up on the couch at all since she went to her room. My husband's experience. This one happened when our son was around 3 to 4 years old. I had wrecked my car, so my mother had come and got me and my little boy. My husband had come home from work and he knew he was with my mother. but he came in and saw a woman that looked like me walk into our bedroom. He had a 3 or 4 minute conversation with her. He was in the living room. He lays his paperwork from work on a table in the living room, goes into our bedroom, and the woman he was talking to was gone. He goes back into the living room to call me, and the paperwork he had laid down was ripped into pieces. My older sister's experience. Her ex has custody of their daughter, and they live in Ohio. We live in Tennessee. He brought my niece down for the summer to let her stay at our house. My sister stayed here while she was here, and they stayed in our son's bedroom. My sister said she woke up to an eerie feeling and looked in the corner of the room. And the little girl that my son called Little Sarah, because she didn't know her name, was sitting in the corner squatting with her elbows on her knees and her hands propping up her face, just looking at my sister. My sister threw the covers over her head and started praying and said it felt like an eternity, but she peeked out of the covers and the little girl was gone. So she sat up in the bed to go to the bathroom. We have connecting doors from our rooms to our son's. She looked in the room where me and my son were sleeping. My husband worked night shift at the time. And the little girl was in the corner of our room squatting. Needless to say, she never went to the bathroom that night. She lay back down, threw the covers over her head, and didn't come out till daylight. Now this happened tonight. It's 4:45 a.m. and my son woke me up around 12. Something and said, "Mom, was that you just whispering to me?" I told him, "I've been asleep. I haven't whispered anything." When my husband gets up for work at 4 a.m., he has to be work at 5 a.m. My husband and my son both watched me pick my son's AirPods up off the floor and put them in his AirPod case. Our son lays back down till 4:25 and something wakes him up. And my son came in the living room and says, "Mom, where is my other AirPod? I watched you put both of them on my case." And we went in his bedroom to look, and it was laying on the floor and none of us had touched them since I stuck them back in their case when I woke up at 4 a.m.
From the outside, it seems to be some average, nondescript house. The kind of place that you'd likely find in any city or small town. It's not, though. This house is like something out of the Twilight Zone or a Stephen King novel. You see, I lived in this house when I was 11 or 12 years old. That was 93, 94. My room was the one above the porch with the double window. My sister's room was across the hall. My mother and my brothers lived downstairs. During the time we lived there, strange things occurred. Some of them you may find hard to believe, and that's okay. I can only assure you that they actually happened. Some 26 years after the fact, I can provide you no evidence and my only solemn word that everything I'm about to tell you is the absolute truth. For starters, sometimes our clocks would run backwards for no discernible reason. We changed the batteries and checked them for defects, but nothing seemed to be amiss. They just randomly started running in reverse from time to time. There was also an issue with our basements. How do I describe this? I guess the best way would be to say the basement seems to be on a portal to hell. We would hear strange noises coming from down there that wouldn't be explained away as creaking pipes or the house setting on the foundation. Things like demonic growling, roaring. When someone had to go down there to do laundry, there was a sound like someone whispering and the whole area had an unsettling feel to it. We had this dog, a German Shepherd named Lassie. She was an exceptionally brave, loyal and protective dog, but she would not go near the basement or the basement door. Eventually, she became so terrified that she ran away and never came back. There was also a night when we all woke up to find a big black crow, or raven, I'm not sure, in the house, flying madly around. This has been the ungodly hours of the morning, mind you, so no one would have been up to open the door or window to let it in. If you can even imagine an intelligent bird like a crow or raven willingly flying through an opening into a human dwelling like some kind of idiotic sparrow. There were no holes in the roof and no place for it to get out. Where did it come from and where did it go? I have no memory of us actually getting the bird out of the house, but I never saw it again. Then there was the man. At the back of the house there was a hallway that led off the dining room and past the kitchen towards the lower floor bedrooms. The twins, mere toddlers at the time, had their nursery in the foremost room on the left. They would sit back there and have conversations with someone that none of us could see. They referred to this person as simply the man. The man seemed to enjoy keeping the boys company, but he was anything but benign. One day, while the rest of us were at school, my mum had the twins in their high chairs, feeding them lunch. When she stepped away to do something, get something from the kitchen or answer the phone, don't remember, there was a crash and the sound of screaming. One of the twins that was on the floor was highly tipped over. He'd bashed his head really bad. The high chairs had been secured on the footing before she started. When she asked the other twin what happened, he replied, "The man did it." My little brother ended up in the hospital in a coma for a long time. You might be happy to know that he survived and today is married with 2 beautiful daughters. But CPS didn't believe that my mother was innocent and began to stalk us. They would park across the street from our house and watch us. They would drop in unexpectedly. They were looking for a reason to take us and put us in the foster care. This is how we ultimately ended up leaving the house. Rather than deal with any more tragedy or weirdness or stalking, we packed up what we could and moved across the country. What we couldn't take with us, we left behind. I asked my mother once, about 5 years before she died, if she'd ever actually seen the entity that the boys referred to as the man. She said she had, but only once. She said she was walking past the kitchen door one day and had caught sight of someone in her peripheral vision. A tall man wearing dark clothes, standing with pink hair to the side, staring out of the kitchen window. When she turned to get a better look, he was gone. That house scared the crap out of all of us. There was always a feeling like we were being watched. Thankfully, it's many years and many miles behind us. When we left, there was no one to pay the mortgage, so the bank took repossession. Because of this, today it's privately owned by people I don't even know. For that reason, I will not disclose the location. I won't even tell you what state it's in. If you've ever been unfortunate enough to stumble upon it, however, I advise you to keep walking. Don't stop to look back, because if you stop to look at a picture, there's something likely will happen to you taking a knee.
A few years ago, me and my old man moved into a condo. Nothing spectacular, just a bigger place for our expanding family. We went through a rutch patch and split up, but we still lived together. I know, not everyone agrees, but whatever. We worked opposite one another, and I slept on the fold-out couch for a while. I began to notice a lot of noises coming from the kitchen at night. Typically, it would start at around 11 or 12, and it was harmless at first. I told him about the noises, but he brushed them off. A few nights later, they started to get more intense. I could hear dishes being moved around and clinking on each other. Then I started to hear the drawers and cabinet open slightly and close. I was able to get a recording of the sounds. The couch was located right across the hall, in front of the kitchen door, so it was a decent enough recording. I showed the recording to him, and it made him second guess what I said. So one night, he sat out with me and just listened, and sure enough, it started. And it was very loud, and you could tell it was movement in the kitchen, as if it was in use. We sort of just laughed it off for a while, even after the fridge door opened up one night. We would joke and call it our friendly ghost, ask what it was cooking, just being silly and stupid. After working on our issues, we both got back together, and things were fine. For a bit. We didn't even notice the noises as much. A few months ago, out of nowhere, things started to get rough. Not bad, but definitely not fun to deal with. Pictures started coming off our walls at random, even breaking some of the glass ones. Books would get moved off shelves. Most of it we could see or hear. Then things started to move and fall off of our desk. Most recently, it's been quiet again, which is nice, but I just don't like dealing with this. We're looking to move, but it's an expensive area here. Me and my old man have been taking the advice to stop acknowledging and engaging in the ghost's activities. We've been pretending not to notice or rationalize it as something else. The issue is, our kids now think we are playing a game with them, so they're more hyper aware now and drawing attention to everything that happens. The more we ignore it, the more they think we're joking and they acknowledge it. They're kids, so I don't want to get upset with them for thinking this. But I'm not sure how to be serious enough with them to explain that mommy and daddy are not making these things happen as a joke. Last night was family movie night. We were watching the new Croods movie since my kids haven't seen it and they loved the first. The entire time we were watching it, we had Xbox controllers flying off our desks, water bottles being knocked off tables. It's becoming hard for us to ignore while the kids laugh about it jokingly, saying, "Oh, it's just our ghost friend." And it's so uneasy to hear them say that. I told my Elsie about all this, and she suggested that she come stays with me again and smudge the place. We are indigenous. Since I never learned how to properly use my white sage. I don't want her to take away from her life just to travel over here for this, but I guess she can sense how stressed it's making me. I'm at a loss. It's been going on for 4 years now. We moved to that house when I was younger, and since day one, weird things were happening. We had a mountain dog, and in our old house, she would literally spend her whole winter days sleeping outside in the snow. She liked so much the cold, you guessed it, she would always spend the summers lying on the basement's ceramic to cool down. But not in this house. On the first night, I already could feel that something was going on. My dog was always sleeping in my bed. I went ahead the first night and closed the light. About 4 minutes into complete darkness, my dog on my left side and my room door on my right, I saw my dog raising her head and staring in the long, dark corridor. She stared for about 9 seconds before she started crying and kind of panicking. I freaked out, opened the light, nothing was there. I went back to bed. The dog lay down beside me again. 10 minutes later, just the same, but now she's growling. I opened the light, she jumped out of the bed and ran into my parents' room. She never went into the basement since, and every time she would come would be during the day because I would kind of force her in my room with food. She would take it, look nervously around her and run back upstairs with her tail in her arse, even during crazy hot weather. When playing on my computer at night once, my computer mouse flew from my desk to my face at about a 45-degree angle up, which is impossible to have accidentally happened. There's even a night where we threw a party, and as we all went to sleep at the end of the evening in a deep, dark basement, we were still talking in bed until we fell asleep, sleeping like 6 to 8 or 9 people in each room. Anyway, about 7 people in the room beside mine saw my friend that we were hearing talking to our other friend outside in a tent at the same moment, open their door abruptly, burst into their room, open the light, said some bullshit, and closed the light and slapped the door. Well, at least, so they say. One of the girls in the room came into our room, opened our light, and asked what the fuck. And this is where the story gets weird. My friend never stepped foot in the house. He was outside the whole time. Neither did he open the light, since it was pitch black and about 15 people would have seen it. But on the other side, there were 7 that all got woke up by the same thing. Our friend busting into their room and opening the light. Sometimes at night, I would hear the ground crack, as if someone would be walking towards my room from the end of the corridor, and it would stop right at my door. Lots of other little things happened, but the only attack incident we've had so far was the mouse in the face. I've been sitting on this for 4 years. I know, because it happened when my daughter was a newborn. She was a few months old. Let me start with, I'm a skeptical person. I believe sometimes our minds prime us when we hear a scary story, and then shortly after we see or experience a scary story. Now, I also believe in paranormal. So it was a Sunday, and my spouse and I decided, after putting our daughter to bed, we would spend some time together and play Minecraft. And so we did just that. Our daughter to bed and play Minecraft together, during which our daughter awakes in need of food. My wife goes to take care of her, and I had the strangest, creepiest feeling I ever experienced. Like some other presence was there. It was so strong that I paused the game. My wife is not a fan of even the zombie sounds on Minecraft, such when we play it, it's in peaceful mode, no zombies, skeletons, or other mobs. So I note said feeling, but brushed it aside. Skeptic in me, my imagination, etc. I thought about asking my spouse when she came back, but again, I brushed it aside. And just as I pushed the idea out, she asks, "You noticed anything strange while I was gone?" So I said, "Strange how? Creepy?" I proceeded to tell her my experience of the strange feeling, and she says while she was tending to our daughter, she saw what she thought was shadows moving. Well, we stopped what we were doing and brought our daughter into our room and went to bed. My spouse works as a CNA at nursing homes and care facilities quite a bit, and she's had her own scary experiences, such she doesn't let horror movies or anything deemed scary play in our house. So it was probably around 9 or 10, and my family was moving back to our hometown area from El Paso, where my dad was stationed on a base there. Our realtor, M, was showing us houses and decided upon showing us a house when it was just getting dark outside. So we pull up, and it's overgrown with bushes and ugly crabgrass. The sidewalk is uneven and jagged, even missing in some places. The white siding is pretty much brown by this point, with tree branches overhanging almost every inch of the roof, so all you can see is this cave-like entrance into the front door. M informs us, oh yeah, it's been on the market for years, and there's no electricity, so we will be seeing it in the dark. We go inside, and the sight that hits us is remarkably depressing. There's broken picture frames and glass all over the floor. Red splotches of some sort of powder are covering everything. A very, very large chest is in the center of the living room, about 5 feet in the front of the front door. And there is the room's one single intact photo frame, with a half-ripped picture of a family inside of it, a boy and his mom. Sitting on top of it in almost perfect condition, except one crack in the glass. The house smells like something. Something old and wet, yet fresh and rotting at the same time. No one noticed the smell but me. Now, me being the scaredy cat I am, I was ready to skedaddle. My parents didn't want to be rude to M, so we continued to see the house. We move into the hallway of the living room, and the attic door with the ladder going up to it is down and wide open, like a mouth with a staircase leading to it. My dad shuts the attic and decides we should take a look at the garage. The door into the garage is directly in front of us, off the hallway. We open the door, and this is where shit gets real. Now, y'all remember when M told us there was no electricity and we would be seeing the house in the dark, right? The singular light bulb in the garage was glowing blue. Not a bright iridescent blue by any means, but a sickly dim blue that was just bright enough to illuminate the walls and floor. My parents and M both made a comment how that was weird and what could cause that. Oh, I really don't know, huh? Strange. I couldn't care less because what I was staring at was worse than any creepy light that was working when it shouldn't have been. There was something inside the garage. It looked like a human, or maybe what used to be a human, but it appeared wet. Its skin kind of looked like if you grabbed it, it would just slip right off. I could see veins through the skin, which was so pale it seemed almost see-through.
This thing was emaciated. I could see all its ribs, I could see hip bones. Its arms and legs consisted of just enough fat in the thighs and upper arms that you could tell that they were not just sticks slapped on a lump of flesh. The neck was just long enough to appear proportionally weird, and the head was turned to look straight at me. If you could even say it was looking, because where normal eyes would be, there were just holes. I don't remember a mouth. There were stringy clumps of hair and hanging from the tops and sides of its head. And I got the sixth sense that it was happy to see me, almost as if it was thinking, finally. I watched this thing crawl on all fours, think hands and very long feet, not hands and knees, from the centre of the garage directly under the light bulb, cross in front of me and my family and Em, and disappear into the wall. It kept its head turned on me the whole time, and I followed it with my eyes the whole time. I don't remember even feeling scared in the traditional sense, like, oh shit, what was that, I need to leave. I felt invited, I felt intrigued, and more than anything, I felt like it had been waiting on me, just me. I felt like it was telling me, come in, make yourself at home, you're welcome here. I could hear my parents and Em talking underneath the thoughts in my head about what this thing was thinking, what it wanted, what it was. Like I was somewhere else and it was just me and this thing. My parents decided they were thoroughly creeped out though, and without seeing the rest of the house, we left. They told Em they weren't interested, and that was that. We fired her shortly after because she made a habit of showing us abandoned houses in the pitch dark. I was the only person who saw the thing, but my parents, after thinking I was asleep in the car on the way home, started talking about how once they opened the garage door, they felt like they were trespassing, like someone was watching them. It felt colder all of a sudden than the rest of the house. It smelled like rotted meat, and something just wasn't right about that blue light. I walked into my home office on Tuesday night to do some work around 9:30 p.m. My wife and dogs were in the bed around 9 p.m. When I walked into my office, I found that a drawer from my desk had been removed from its normal place and was lying in front of the doorway. It was moved about 2 feet out from where it would normally be, and then 5 feet over and placed on the ground. Its normal position is on the desk, about 2.5 feet off the floor. What was odd was that the contents of the drawer were all still there, as if someone had removed it and held it from the button and set it down relatively gently, instead of just pulling it out of the desk and letting it fall. Time is sort of important because I left the house at 2 p.m. to attend to some meetings, and my wife had left earlier for work. The drawer was in the desk when I left. We both got round about 7 p.m. and had dinner and chatted before she decided to lay down earlier than normal. When I discovered the drawer out of place, the only time it could have happened was between 2 and 7, maybe 9 if this was silently performed. It wouldn't be the result of sleepwalking, since my wife probably wasn't asleep yet. She'd only just gone to lay down. Wanted to address this because someone else I told got really focused on sleepwalking, but no one was asleep yet. My wife said she didn't do it when I spoke with her. I don't think my dogs could have done it without making a mess. I didn't do it. My wife and I have no history of any sort of sleepwalking or paranormal experiences. This is a first for us. Also, nothing else in any room was disturbed or out of place. There was no sign of a break-in or anyone else being in our home. There have been no follow-up weird experiences. I was probably 10 or younger when this happened. I was in my house, downstairs in the living room that connected to the kitchen, sitting on the couch in front of the TV. It was turned off. I remember seeing my reflection in the black mirror of the TV and thinking how creepy it was. I don't remember what, but I was playing with something, lost in focus, when suddenly the sun went down. All the lights were off, so it turned almost pitch black, and I was getting a little scared. There were 5 people living in my house at the time, my parents, sister, and grandmother and I, so the lights were always on. The house was always alive and rarely felt empty. Without telling me, my parents and sister had left the house, so it was unusually quiet and dark. Then I heard it. It was a distinct sound. High heel footsteps walking slowly toward me from the kitchen, getting louder and louder. With each step slowly inching closer and getting louder, the presence felt evil. It was getting so loud that I was absolutely horrified, frozen in terror for a few seconds, until I bolted out of the living room and up the staircase. The whole way up was pitch black, and the only light was coming from the cracks of my grandmother's bedroom door. I threw open the door and jumped into the bed next to her, utterly afraid of this evil, invisible woman in high heels. But she never bothered me with her high heels again, although later on she might have tried to scare me by singing in my vents. But that's a story for another time. I lived in this house a little over a year back in 2017. It was a white, two-story house that was obviously old. Our landlords were an old Korean couple who left some items in the house when we were renting it. They included an old painting in the basement, a chest and a mannequin in the attic, which were both wet and smelled funky. I initially felt nothing weird about the house, and I didn't for a while. I've had some experiences beforehand, but not as bad as this house. So let's get to the interesting parts. Activity started to peak a few months into living there, and they were not positive one bit. One night, I was sleeping on the couch in my living room, watching TV. There was a walkway that led into the dining room, which I could see into from the left side, opposite of the staircase, which was on my right. Not a very big living room. We had an Alexa sitting on a little table in the dining room. The Alexa first lit up on its top ring and started playing what sounded like Mexican music. The music played for about 1 minute before completely stopping. The Alexa stayed lit for a few seconds, then turned off. During this time, I was both confused and also scared because no one said anything to activate the Alexa. This wasn't my last experience in the house. Another night in the living room, I heard footsteps coming from the staircase, and I heard a deep growl, like from an animal. I shut my eyes hard and tucked my blanket in to make myself feel safe, because I felt certain I would be attacked. But nothing came, only the intense feeling of being watched while I cowered in fear. Another night, I wanted to go up to use the bathroom. Coincidentally, the light switch for the stairs happened to be up the stairs, meaning I had to walk upstairs in the dark. We had a laundry chute built into the wall on the side. Because I saw nothing, I wasn't aware that the chute was wide open, which slammed shut, making a super loud clapping sound on the polished wood. Startled, I ran right back downstairs and cowered in my blanket on the couch. Whenever I would sleep in my room, I would hear footsteps lightly walking through the hall and making obvious creaks in the floor, always stopping at my bedroom door. Every single night for a week. Each time I texted my dad to check. He would open his door and tell me no one was in front of my door. One incident happened when me, my dad, and brother came home to find boxed light bulbs shattered all over the basement floor. And another incident was when we came home at night, sat down, and heard a loud thud come from the basement. We called the police to investigate, and they found absolutely no one anywhere in the house. Freaky shit. I lived in this house from ages 2 to 13. It was a smaller bungalow. There were 3 small bedrooms down a long hallway that led to the living room. There was a finished basement with a concrete room, which was intended to be used for cold storage. I remember being absolutely horrified of this room. I always used to see shadows of a creature or human-like figure which appeared to be watching me whenever the door was left open. I would refuse to go anywhere near the room and would cry hysterically if I got too close. Additionally, Whenever either of my parents went into the basement, I would stand at the top of the stairs screaming bloody murder, begging my parents to not go near the room and to return to the main floor. Upstairs, my room was directly across the small hallway from my parents'. I would refuse to enter the hallway at dark, and my mom told me I often would wake up screaming and crying in the night, begging her to sleep in my bed with me, so the shadows wouldn't hurt me. In the living room, I remember playing or watching the TV. Out of the corner of my eye, I would always see an older couple with outfits that appeared to be from the 1800s. The man was wearing a top hat and a black suit that was shorter in the front and longer in the back. The woman was wearing a dress that was wide at the bottom and had a corset top. The couple would pace back and forth down the hallway, often stopping for a couple of seconds before turning around to pace the other way. However, every time I turned my head to confirm what my peripheral vision saw, they would disappear. Up until the day we moved at the age of 13, I refused to be alone in the house due to the grim feeling of being watched that I was overcome with any time I entered the house. I would wait in the backyard for 2 hours until my father got home from work, so I didn't have to be home alone. Immediately after we moved, these feelings and my history of night terrors completely stopped. Fast forward a decade later, now I'm in my 20s. I was having lunch with my mom and her best friend when the topic of our old house came up in conversation. I began telling my mom about how eerie I felt as a kid living there, but quickly brushed it off as being a child with an active imagination when reflecting on the experience as an adult. However, my mom informed me she had the same feelings and odd experiences in that house, but never told me because she didn't want to scare me. My mom began to describe an old couple she would see walking down the hallway. I couldn't believe it. Finishing each other's sentences, we discussed the same couple, almost word for word with the description. My mom even told me she used to have a priest come over every couple of months while I was at school to bless the house. I still consider myself a bit of a skeptic, but it's really hard to explain my mom seeing the same couple as I did, despite never discussing them with each other. I've come to a point in my life where my mom is trying to tell me all those family secrets I was too young to understand. Every weekend or so, we have these long talks. It was a bit off-putting at first, but I eventually came to value the anecdotes and lessons she gave me. They had the feel of bedtime stories, really, only the protagonists were now my family and people I knew. The implications of the events were very real, and the effects ranged from anger, laughter, to nostalgia. Nostalgia. That's what I first felt when we talked about the old house. That building which has seen many changes in ownership and purpose. That building which has always closed and evacuated exactly after 10 p.m. That building with an old rusty plaque that dates back to 1810. That building was where I lived for most of my childhood. When I found out that many locals thought it was a haunted place, I was confused. My days as a child roaming its halls and corridors, whose heights were unlike any house I'd ever seen, were quite normal and fun to me. I had no memory whatsoever of anything paranormal taking place, not even the classic friend that was but a product of my imagination thing. Doubtful and sometimes mocking faces were the reaction to my uneventful experience. I had just ignored the matter up until my mom brought it up at one of our talks. Did anything strange ever happen to you or my brothers? Nothing ever happened to me. That was my first question. And then my mom started from the very beginning. We arrived at the old house when I was about 6. Mom had truly struck a good deal. We could get to live in the ground floor of this massive, 2-storied, beautiful house and pay a small rent if we agreed to help the cleaning lady with the first floor once a month. Maybe it was too good a deal to be true. The owners did not care to mention it, but others warned Mom of the danger. The house was feared. Hair being pulled by an invisible hand, footsteps on the upper floor, knocks on windows whose maker never showed up, stuff out of place, and the like. Those were boringly common tropes about haunted old places, and people loved to talk even when they never visited the place themselves, my mom thought. So, she decided to take the offer, although not without a certain degree of dread. But as papers were being signed and furniture being moved, something happened. A neighbour, an old lady that had, as my mum vividly recalled, the habit of looking behind you when talking to you, said, "You'd best be mindful of the girl. She's a devilish one. No two ways about it." And then the neighbour told the tale of a little girl that was buried within one of the walls of the house. Apparently, she had an accident, and, as a weird custom had it, she was made part of the building, so as to make it stronger. As far-fetched as it seemed, my mom took note, perhaps out of fear for this crone-looking figure. But I believe it was mainly due to her strong instinct to protect the family now that Dad took off and ran. It occurred just a day before we slept for the first time at the old house. My mom went to the building all by herself, directly to what would be our washing room. She faced the wall inside of which this girl was supposedly lying. She said a prayer out loud, and then she whispered straight to the white, now turned yellow, peeled off surface. "We mean you no harm. We just want to live here like a true family, so please don't do anything to hurt us." After that, she left our fanciest platter with some candy before the decaying wall, as well as a couple of votive candles. Our very first days at the old house have disappeared in the midst of our memories. If anything scary ever happened, it would have had to be minor so as to be eclipsed by all the great times we had. My mum always kept the girls' platter full of candies and desserts. Whenever she bought or baked something sweet, a bit of it went on the platter. Who would have imagined that I had to share with a ghostly presence? And that seemed to be the end of the otherworldly chapter. But as we reminisced about the important things that transpired at those 6 or 7 years we spent at the house, weird anecdotes started to come to my mum's memory. Since the old house was quite large, it became sort of a hotspot for both my mum's and my big brother's friends. We could have these big, albeit chill parties every month or so. This always seemed strange to my mum. The house was well known for its paranormal happenings, so it would follow that but a few people would want to come visit. Despite that, as I clearly remember, they did want to, and badly so. I personally like to think the ambience we created was usually strong enough to ward off any presence with ill intent. At any rate, on one occasion my brother threw a party in his own living room. Yes, the building actually had an entirely separate and independent small wing. It was late at night. Dudes and gals were dancing to my brother's DJ skills, but then someone came near to talk to him. It was a friend of his, and he claimed to have seen a kid using the rusty, creaking swing that was beyond my brother's place. He went to take a look from the window. The structure of the contraption could be barely made out. Indeed, the seat was moving to the constant creaks, but it was empty. My brother went out to the empty lot I used as a playground during the day. I was completely enclosed by tall, abandoned buildings, so at night the place looked as dark as some beast's throat. He called out to me. No answer was made, and the creaking slowly halted. So he decided to go look for me in my mom's wing, the main wing of the house. Once inside, my mom ran into him, and he told her that the empty lot was a dangerous place for a kid to play at night. She was weirded out. "Dear, your little brother has been sleeping in his room since your friends arrived." He could not believe it. Together they went to pay a visit to my room, to which I answered with the kind of snoring one gets from sleeping too hard. "Then who was that kid my friend saw at the swing? I saw the thing moving on its own, I swear." Needless to say, the party moved to the main wing, away from the beast's throat and lit with those really old, beautiful lamps my mom still keeps around. The kid? It gave me goosebumps, although my curiosity was piqued. But did you yourself ever see this kid? Again, she told me she didn't see anything at all, but she did start to remember the time an aunt of hers came by to the old house when we were away. Now, the main entrance to the house has practically stayed as it was during my childhood, a big two-piece black metal gate that was opened using a remote. It was how cars came to a narrow garden and then entered the garage. The gates had a mail netting at the bottom, and it reached low enough for anyone to clearly see the feet of a few people standing nearby at either side. It was a cool feature. As a kid, I liked to try and spot whoever dared to use the doorbell. This very doorbell was no doubt relentlessly pressed by one of my mom's aunts at a certain date. Apparently, she wanted to ask urgently about a piece of gossip. A pair of feet wearing kid shoes greeted her through the netting some minutes in. "Hi dear, is your mom home?" The voice of an infant gave a sharp no. "Well then, would you mind letting me in? I'll wait for her. When is she coming back?" In a hard to describe tone, the person on the other said admitted that he didn't know. "I'm locked up. I'm all alone. My mother left me here and I can't get out." The woman felt pity for his grandniece and decided to stay put with him until his mother came home. After a few more minutes, it happened. My mom arrived in her old crimson Cherokee. She gave a honk when she saw her aunt, and they both entered the old house. Mom started to unload the groceries while her aunt talked to her. "How could you leave your son like that, all alone? He was very sad. Guess he went into the house." Mom suddenly stopped and frowned. "What are you talking about? He was with me all along." The trunk opened, and there I was, playing with some toys. My grandaunt was incredulous, so she grabbed me by the hand and touched my face, getting more and more pale by the second. She started to babble. It's you. It's really you. You are here." We all went to the living room, but then I left to do something else. My mom told me that it took a couple of chocolates to get her aunt out of the shock. Of course, she now never dared to go even close to the old house. And soon, all of our relatives followed suit. These are the most prominent stories my mom told me. Many other things happened, but they very much more cliche and rather short. But, according to my mom and the friends who were involved, they did happen. And as if that wasn't enough, you've got some facts. The old house has never been again used as a house. Only businesses have set up shop, but a lot of them have left rather quickly. Nowadays, there's a restaurant bar, although I've heard stories that point to something weird taking place. At 9 p.m., all patrons are asked to leave, even during weekends. That's right. Keep in mind that most businesses of their kind make a lot of their profit during these crucial hours. A friend of the family had this evacuation happen to him, to which he asked why. One of the waiters told him that they all left the building before 10 p.m. because of the terrifying things that occurred after. Apart from that, let's not forget that the house is at least 200 years old or so. A faded plaque at the front says that the building is meant to honour some local cavalry unit of the Independence War. Frankly, I don't know what to think of all this. Maybe I should just let it go, as it really doesn't bother me, and I can't remember anything weird happening to me. Nonetheless, I'm about to start an important chapter in my life, one that may take me away from my hometown and friends for a long time. Wouldn't it be nice if I could look more into this, so as to indulge in a bit of nostalgia and just maybe begin a journey of self-discovery? It is also intriguing to know why it is that all close relatives, meaning mom, my brother, my sister and myself, didn't have anything bad or scary happen directly to us. Is it because of the ritual my mom did regularly? What about the playful boy and the girl that was supposedly buried within one of the walls? Shortly after my son turned 2, but before he could talk well enough to understand, he would run out of his own room, slam the door, and wouldn't go back in. He would just point and say gum gum like an exaggerated swallowing noise. It took us a few months to figure out what it was he was so afraid of, and I made a point not to tell his mother what I thought it was until she came to the same conclusion. We agreed we had a resident spooky boy. My son used to talk about him on a daily basis and wouldn't play in his room or want to sleep in there. We decided to burn sage and smudge the room and the rest of the apartment while he was at daycare. The next day, he started playing in his room. Eventually, I got my son to work up the confidence to say, "Go away," when he saw him or was afraid. He'd always let us know by pointing and saying its name to let us know it was around. During COVID, my estranged father came up from Texas and started staying with us. A few weeks in, he asked me what about my son was talking about when he'd say gum gum, and that he was talking about punching gum gum. I told him that it was my son's imagination, to which he replied, "I don't think he's imagining that, buddy." My son can clearly communicate now, and rarely brings him up anymore. I've pressed him for details, like what does he look like, where he lives, etc. My son says he still lives in the ceiling in his room, but he doesn't come around. And says he's scary, but nice. My dad always said that if he ever died in the apartment, he'd whoop his ass for scaring our son. He contracted COVID and ultimately succumbed to the disease in December. I keep his urn in my son's bedroom, and Gum Gum hasn't been around since. We have a semi-rural house, which is very dark and quiet at night. I lived there for 2 years. I was frequently alone, and I never heard or felt a thing. I moved an hour away for work, and my youngest son moved into the master bedroom. His girlfriend is there most of the time too. So, they started telling me a while back that they were hearing things. Footsteps in the hall, knocking on the wall in the bedroom. I honestly thought they were imagining it, although my son is the epitome of show me proof or it's not real. I had a car accident recently and stayed at the house for a while. Sleeping in the spare room one night, reading a book, and I heard footsteps. Something moving up and down the hall. I've always been one just to get up and check something, but this froze me. I was terrified and absolutely certain that the door was about to open. Just thinking about it makes my heart race. My son's girlfriend is a realtor, so she did some research to see if there's anything about the house, and there's nothing. My ex's brother died in a car accident at 18, and we've all seen flashes of him. But this feel malevolent, or at best, not friendly. One day, I was awake around 1 a.m. and my cousin, who is my aunt's oldest, 7 years old, woke up. She cuddled in the blanket next to me and watched TV with me. I ended up going to the bathroom, so as I got up, she grabbed my arm and practically begged me not to leave. I told her, "Don't worry, I'll be quick." I come back out a minute later and she was hid under the blanket. I took it off her head and she had tears coming down and pointed at the window. We were in the living room, so the window was to our front patio. I went to look and saw nothing, so I laid next to her and we fell asleep, but the story's not over. The next day, my brother and I, along with my cousins, went to see my mom and her boyfriend. We explained the weird stuff, and they gave us sage, I believe it was, and I told them about what happened with my cousin. My mom's boyfriend tried asking her what she saw, and she whispered into his ears, but just started bawling in tears. I was heartbroken. We asked what she said, but apparently she barely started talking when she ended crying. We never brought it up with her fearing she will cry again. She's 9 now, and I feel like I want to ask her, but she saw if she even remembers. The one thing that made me more sad was she begged me not to leave, but I still went. And she had to see what she saw alone. And scared, luckily, we're all out of that house. I am part of a paranormal team in Northern Ireland called Northwest Paranormal Research. We visit haunted locations all over the island of Ireland. But this one is probably the worst of all. We parked the cars about 500 feet from the actual house. We walked up a bit of the road, then up the lane where, at the time, was all lined with a dense forest. We go inside the run-down old cottage. No power or anything there. We set up our gear. A locked-off camera and a microphone in each of the 3 rooms. We settle down in the centre room, where the open fireplace is. I have my laptop running, recording from all the microphones. So, we settle down and do some EVPs. 3-minute bursts. In a few, we get what we think are replays, but on amplifying it, sounds like animals around the house. Around 11:30, we're all sitting on our chairs having a break, coffee and sandwiches, when we hear a loud this from the bedroom beside us. We all jump and run in. With all the torches on, we look around to see what we could have made such a noise. But there's nothing of such a weight to do so. So in our heads, we're all thinking, it's all going to kick off now. But it doesn't. Not for another 20 minutes. It gets cold, and I mean Arctic cold. We can see our breath, yet the ambient temperature is 8 degrees Celsius. We hear little ticks, like someone throwing rice or something at us, but we can't see anything. We have 2 night vision cameras, and there's nothing showing up on those either. Then, from the laptop, we can see spikes in the audio, but we can't actually hear anything with our ears. There's definitely something going on, but we can't nail it down. Then Simon hears somebody calling her name being whispered into her ear. Then I hear mine. But we have no recorded evidence of this, despite having all the tech with us. We pull out a small table and a glass to do divination. And no, this is not like a Ouija board, this is a simpler form of communication. As we have our fingers on the glass, we ask out, is there anyone out there who will or would like to communicate? The glass immediately starts to swing violently about the table. We ask for the glass to stop, but it doesn't. We decide that it's getting a bit too intense, so we pack up and decide to leave. On our way down from the lane, we were just chatting amongst ourselves about the goings on. As we cross the ditch at the bottom, I hear these chilling words roared at me, right into my ear. Never return. We haven't been back since. Other people have and experienced bad things, but we will never return. So it's the year 2000. My parents just had my little sister, and we were in need of a house with an extra bedroom. We find a decent house in a good neighbourhood, and the place seems pretty relaxed. The basement was always a weird place for me though. I always felt like there was someone else down there, watching. The first time I actually saw something, I wasn't alone. My sister, 3 friends and myself were in the basement watching Jurassic Park. Our parents were upstairs in the kitchen playing cards. During the movie, the power cut out. Something small and white comes creeping out from beside the couch we're all sitting on. It resembled a crawling baby. I just remember staring at it, trying to figure out what I was seeing. I was terrified. After a moment of pause, it fucking hissed at us. And then boom, lights were back on and we started screaming. We ran upstairs to our parents and explained what just happened. Of course, they didn't believe us. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have either. From that point on, things became more frequent and pronounced. Regular occurrences included creaking stairs at night, having a feeling of dread or panic in the downstairs bathroom. For our guests, seriously, people were freaked out being in there. Feeling something behind you in the basement and kitchen, things being misplaced after using them, hearing loud whispers directly in my ear that would wake me up at night. This is the reason I still sleep with the covers over my ears at age 26. Seeing things moving in peripheral vision, and super cold spots throughout the house. Years of experience, and my parents never believed me about any of them. Fast forward to 2017, and I'm moving in with my boyfriend with the help of our friends. Our friend Ali makes a sudden realization that she's not only been to my parents' house before, but that her best friend's family were the previous owners of the home. Weird coincidence, right? Buckle up, y'all. So, moving day has come and gone. The buds all get together to hang out. Myself, Ali, and another friend are discussing weird childhood experiences when I began talking about the aforementioned baby-like being from the basement. Ali starts tearing up and insists that she needs to text her best friend to clarify something. After getting her reply, she turned to me. Hey, do you happen to remember the last name of the family that lived in your house? Yeah, last name. Now she's actually crying and visibly shaken. Then she told me why. Turns out, the previous family had been expecting another child, and unfortunately, it was stillborn. Hearing that was probably the most surreal moment of my life. When I called my parents to tell them what I found out, and to prove I wasn't crazy all these years, their skeptic selves literally had nothing to say other than, that's definitely weird. So yeah, there's finally some validity to my claims, and I don't really feel good about it. TLDR, my friends and I saw the ghost of a baby in my parents' house, and it turned out that the previous owners had a stillborn while living there. I had a few things happen in the duplex apartment I lived in with my sister, mom, and occasionally my mom's ex-husband when they were off and on when I was little. The first thing that happened, one night I was asleep in bed, but I was having an awful dream. The sky was dark blood red, and there was a lot of lawnmowers sitting around, covered in blood as well. It scared me enough that I woke up, and after a few minutes of trying to decide if I should go in with my mom and sleep, I decided to try and close my eyes again. Before I could close my eyes, I saw two figures float out of my wall. One of them was a little girl with a Victorian maybe style dress and curly blonde hair. The other was a black mass that I could tell was a man, but it had no face. I had a very intense feeling that the little girl did not want to be with the man. I could feel a fear from her almost. As quickly as they appeared, they turned and walked back into the wall. I ended up dragging my sister with me into my mom's room, where she revealed she'd seen something too, but didn't know what it was. We slept with my mom that night. The second experience in that duplex, my sister and I were sitting on the stairs. Right around the corner of the stairs was the little attic type thing that we would always find objects that had gone missing. Keys, silverware, etc. Well, while we were sitting, my sister was a step above me, sitting facing me, and we were talking. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and it gave me such a hard shove that I tumbled down the stairs, and then ended up with both of my eyes being blackened. After the stairs incident, my mom was frightened enough to move out of the duplex. However, I've always felt sensitive to do things ever since. I always feel like I see things, and if I have my back turned in bed, I feel extremely uneasy and scared and have to face outward toward the open door. I've also wondered if something could be the cause of my severe anxiety and depression that developed during my childhood. Edit. I recently had to move my mirror to the other side of the door as well due to getting a very uneasy and anxious feeling with it pointing anywhere near my bed. When I was a child, my mother had to move us out in an abusive household with her boyfriend. Being poor in rural eastern Kentucky, we didn't have many housing options at the time, so she got some assistance to have us a house built on my family's property through the government. This was a fully new place, so it was hardly one that you would assume would be haunted, like with a history. But after it was built and we finally moved in, very unexplainable things began to happen to us while we were there. The first thing that ever happened to me was the attic door being ripped open and slamming shut while I was home alone. My mother and my older sister were taking my younger brother to the doctor, and as my uncle lived next door to us, she let me stay home by myself. The strange thing about it is that it wasn't a normal door. If it were, I would just assume it was a draft of wind or something. The opening to our attic was a cutout in the ceiling though, and the door was a thick, whole piece of plywood, one that I could barely lift up myself when I went up there. This thing lifted from the side, like it did when we went upstairs, and then slammed shut, followed by loud, thumping footsteps on our stairs. As soon as it lifted, I looked up at it. I could see straight up into the attic and never saw anyone or anything come down those steps, not even a shadow. The footsteps stopped at the last step, and then everything went silent, leaving me terrified and wondering what the hell just happened. Second experience was seen by the whole family. I have to explain here that at the time I was 10, my sister 14, and my little brother 6, and we were all below 5'5". My mother is only 5'1", so this would have been impossible for any of us to do. Our back door was in our kitchen, and it stood at a height of 6'5", as most standard doors do. The weird thing is, after 6 months of living there, we began to notice a handprint well above the door frame, like someone had slapped it as they walked through. Seeing as none of us could reach it, even standing in a chair, my uncle came to investigate it, telling my mother that it was car grease and the oil that the print was made of. There was no man in our house at the time. My mother was divorced, and my father was currently going through cancer treatments that only came to the house 3 times before he died. No one visited that was tall enough to reach that area, and most of the men in my family are 5'7" and under. The last experience I'll tell you about happened when our house unfortunately burned down. As I said before, we were poor, and the only heat we had was a kerosene heater, and one that sadly was in a bad shape. Needless to say, the heater caught fire one evening, catching the rest of the house up quickly. My mother had enough time to grab the 3 of us and get out of the house, closing the back door behind her as she went. Our steps at that door were not connected to the house, so when someone walked down them, they would move away and slam back into the house when you stepped off. Once we were in the yard though, the back door slammed open and then slammed shut once more, and the steps moved forward as if someone was on them, and then slammed back against the wall. We never saw anyone leave that house. That door opened to an empty, ablaze room and slammed shut again. Those steps moved, but there wasn't anyone on them. And to this day, I still have no idea what the fuck was actually going on in that house. There are way more incidents, but I feel as if these 3 tell the most about the situation. I can't logically figure out what was going on. I've tried over the years. Tried to come up with a logical explanations for all the stuff that went on, but I've never been able to. I'm pretty sure I welcomed a spirit into my home when I was 7 years old. My house is close to 30 years old. It's my childhood home, and my parents have been the only owners. They watched our house be built. Since I was 7, we've had various paranormal activity, and my mom, dad, and I are all believers. We always have been. Growing up, the type of activity my family and I experience has been objects quite literally moving in front of us, voices talking, whispers, lights being manipulated, multiple lights in our home being turned on and off at once, a spirit kicking the back of my mom's recliner while she slept, seeing shadowy figures and other apparitions, relentless and harsh footsteps stomping upstairs in my parents' room that can be heard from the family room downstairs, music boxes being manipulated to play music, the ones you have to manually turn yourself to play, a spirit twisting and turning the doorknob to my room back and forth in the middle of the night. My room was locked, thank God, and other weird but smaller occurrences. Long story short, the most common activity out of the list was the footsteps and stomping upstairs. It used to occur so frequently that my mom and I became immune and desensitized to it. I'm talking like it happened almost every day for years. My mom and I experienced it the most because she was a stay-at-home mom and my dad worked a lot. When I was around 12 years old, the activity just seemed to stop completely. None of us experienced anything for the next 10 years. About 4 months ago, when I was home alone, I was downstairs having breakfast and some coffee. The TV was off, and the only noise in the house was my phone because I was on TikTok. I began hearing noises. I paused my phone, and the all too familiar footsteps and stomping was happening upstairs in my parents' room for the first time in 10 years. It went on for about 20 minutes. The next week, when I was home alone, TV off, having breakfast, the exact same scenario. The footsteps and stomping happened again. However, I haven't experienced anything in the last 3.5 months. I did tell my mom about all of this, but she hasn't been experiencing anything. This last weekend, I was gone at my boyfriend's house. I come home this morning, and my mom tells me that her and my father had been hearing the footsteps and stomping in their room for the past 2 nights. My mom said that Saturday night, at around 10:30 when she was in bed, she heard a loud crash that seemed like it came from my side of the house. My dogs went off and started barking, but my mom did not want to get up and investigate. Sunday, my mum opened the door to my room to finally see what had caused the noise from the previous night. Basically, I have a tall bookshelf across from the door to my room. On the top shelf, I have a cute filer for my important paperwork sitting on the back of the shelf, and then 4 Lennox Kate Spade wine glasses that I collect, which are on display. They are wrapped up in the boxes they come in. Lastly, I have 2 festive hats that I wore recently during the 4th of July weekend that I had set up on top of my filer, for lack of a permanent spot for them yet. Continuing, when my mom opened the door was immediately pushing my hats, which had somehow flown across the room and landed on the ground. Then she saw that all 4 of my wine glasses in their boxes were on the ground. Luckily, only one had broken from the impact. This is a new experience. I'm curious to know why the spirit has essentially targeted my belongings. The spirit had flung my hat across the room and swiped my wine glasses off the shelf. We lived in a farmhouse built in the early 1800s. The place was filled with odd energy. Any family or friends that came over noticed this as well. This place was beyond paranormal. One time my mother was holding me as a baby, home alone. Lightning struck our house, and my mother told me it was like her memory erased for an hour. She didn't know who she was. She didn't know who I was. She regained her memory shortly after, but for some reason remembers this encounter. We don't know to this day if it's affiliated with anything paranormal, but I thought I'd share it with you to get a glimpse of the bizarreness of the household. As we began moving away, family complications, it's like the energy switched from friendly to more conniving. We felt targeted, and my stepdad started coming over. I was around 10 at the time, and my mom and him would often sleep overnight on the couch. My stepdad would wake up in the middle of the night and sit upright on the couch. I'm not sure what drove him to waking up, but he remembers laying his head down on his palm while he was sitting, and he remembers my mother talking to him. He didn't look to his side, but he remembers her voice and even his scratching his back. But he looked over to discover my mother had still been sleeping. I'm not sure if he was just tired and hallucinating, but from past experiences, this doesn't surprise me. This wasn't only happening to my mother, this even happened to me. I remember playing in the backyard with some Nerf guns with my brother. Our porch was visible from the side, and I had a strange feeling about the porch. I was used to these feelings, so I looked up to the porch to see myself, but it was completely black, so it stood out and was noticeable as it was day out. I know that thing was me. It had my body type and everything. I know the human brain likes to create fake memories. Maybe these are fake, but I have my family to back me up on these stories, which makes me feel less insane.